Let's go ahead and we are going to jump over to the camera settings. And this is going to be a little bit foreign to you right now because you don't have a lot of experience with your camera just yet. But I want to go ahead and I want to walk through it. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to spin the dial. Okay, so spin the dial. Woo! Okay, so let's talk about these. First of all, full auto. We already talked about this, but let's talk about it again. It's the green box. This is basically, this is your iPhone, okay? It's doing everything for you. You don't get to choose anything. You point it at the scene, you take the picture, the camera makes all the decisions. It decides where it focuses, it decides what ISO to shoot at, it decides what aperture to shoot at, it decides what shutter speed to shoot at, it decides everything. You have no control. So if it's a very simple picture in basic lighting, you're probably going to get a really, really nice shot. If you are backlit, if you are in very dark light, if you have a lot of white, if you have a lot of black in the picture, you're not going to get the results that you see with your eye. So this is what this class is going to help us get off of auto. Now let's go over to P for program. I'm going to be honest with you, it's kind of like auto, but you can set some things. I've never used it. All right, so we're going to skip that. TV. This is also S on every other camera. I don't know why Canon calls it TV, which stands for time value. Basically, it's shutter speed. So my Sony, it's an S. I know Nikon, it's an S. I'm pretty sure most other cameras, it's an S. And that is shutter priority. And shutter priority we will cover in detail in week 3, but this is basically where you choose your shutter speed and the camera does the rest of the work. But we're not going to talk about that until week 3. Now the next one, AV. Canon calls it AV, aperture value. Everybody else in the world calls it A for aperture. Okay, so this is aperture priority. And again, we're going to talk about this in great detail in week 2. So don't worry about it just yet. Just know that this is where you choose your aperture. Notice up top, see that number, that F number? F, that's called an f-stop or aperture. And that's the number I'm changing right now, okay? So we're going to learn this in great detail in week 2. And aperture is actually my favorite thing to play with, and I shoot in aperture priority actually quite a bit. This is manual. And we are not going to go into much detail in manual in this class. We're going to get you off auto. We're going to get you shooting in either aperture priority or shutter priority. I've got another 4-week class that I've got written, I need to record for full manual. And this is where your camera controls nothing. You control the shutter speed, the aperture, the ISO, where it focuses, absolutely everything. So it's all up to you. You have complete control. And it's a really awesome thing to shoot in, but it can be very confusing up front. So that's why we're going to focus on aperture priority and shutter priority out of the gate. Now, bulb. Bulb just leaves the shutter open indefinitely until you turn it off. And so why would you ever use this? I've actually never used it because I've never gone out and done like astrophotography where you're taking pictures of the stars out in the desert. It's very dark. There's no ambient light. The only light is the stars. This is an example where you might leave your shutter open all night and then capture the stars moving through the sky. It's pretty cool. I would love to do it someday, but it's not something that I've ever used. But that would be a reason, or maybe even fireworks. You could potentially use bulb. So basically the shutter stays open until you turn it off. And that is pretty much all I'm going to cover there. Now let's talk about some other settings that you have in your camera. Again, we're just going to set them, and then we are going to, we don't really learn a lot about them until we get into manual, because I don't want to overwhelm you or confuse you. You need to know the basics and how to use your camera before you move on to the more advanced settings. So this is metering. This is spot metering, and this is basically where, oops, it's going to keep turning off, where it keeps looking at one specific area of the picture. And that's where I like to shoot. This looks at the entire scene. This looks at a portion of the scene. and this looks at a specific area. So I like to shoot on spot metering. I would say pick something either spot or partial and just leave it there and don't worry about it. And we already talked about white balance. So you can see there's lots of different options down here, but for this purpose of this class, I want you to have it on auto white balance. Now the next thing is the focusing. So this is called different things on different cameras. So this might be where you have to Google, but one shot focus means your subject is still, your subject is still and you're just focusing, let's say on an eye, and you take the picture. Servo is for, say, sports, where you are following a moving subject around. So you focus on them, they run, you take the picture and they stay in focus. Now AI focus, I've never used it. It's kind of in the middle. I've never used it, so just ignore it. What I would do, Nikon, this is called continuous focus. I believe in Sony it's called continuous focus. Sorry, that keeps turning off. So I want you to find out what, you could even Google what is the Nikon equivalent of AI servo, and it'll tell you, or what is the Sony equivalent of AI servo. So now we've got the drive mode, and I think it's called drive on Canon, or it's the drive button on Canon. Basically it's where you're choosing whether you want a single shot, you want to take continuous high speed. Now some cameras you're only going to have one choice, either continuous, and some have high speed continuous. So it's going to depend on your camera. And this is also where you turn on the self timer and the 2-second self timer, which we're going to talk a little bit about when we talk about shutter speed, because that becomes important. Now let's go back to the menu here. We're going to go back to manual. So you can see this fraction number here that I'm changing up top on the upper left. That is your shutter speed, okay? So on this particular camera, it goes to 1/8,000th of a second. On your camera, it may only go to 1/4,000th of a second. This is going to vary by camera. Generally, your more professional cameras go to 8,000 and your more entry-level cameras go to 4,000. Right now, you don't need to worry about why, just know that that's what this is. It's the shutter speed. Now, we're going to go to the next one, and that's aperture. So depending on your lens, now if you're looking at your lens that you got with your camera, typically it's an 18-55, and it'll say 3.5 to 5.6 if you look at the round part of your lens. A lot of lenses only go as low as 3.5. This particular lens that I'm using goes all the way to 1.8. And we'll talk about that in week 2, why that matters and how it changes your picture. But for right now, I just want you to know that this F number is your f-stop or your aperture. And that's what these numbers mean. So it goes as high as 22 and it goes as low as 1.8, and yours may vary. Now we've got ISO. ISO, as we talked about earlier, is the camera's sensitivity to light. Again, this is going to vary based on your camera. This is an older camera, so mine only goes to 6400. I don't know what that 12,800. I know I've never gone higher than 6400, and the quality is not that good at 6400. Let me show you a picture I took earlier. Let me skip through here. Here we go. So I took this picture at 6400 today. So let me blow this up. Can you see how grainy it is? Let me blow it up even further. You see all that little colored grain in there? That is called digital noise. And you're going to get a lot more digital noise, 1, if you have an older camera. 2, if you're shooting at a high ISO. So this is kind of both. I'm using an older camera. I bought this camera in 2010, and I'm shooting at 6400, which is the maximum ISO that it will go, which it's letting in the most amount of light, but at the cost of a grainier picture. So this can be, I would say, fixed or improved if you want to use an editing program, but just know if you're going to shoot at a higher ISO, especially if you have an older camera, you're going to get some grain. And this is one of the main things, if you wonder, like, new camera bodies come out every year and you're wondering what makes it better, low light performance is one of the biggest things that improves with every single iteration. And you're probably familiar with this if you've ever taken an iPhone shot in a very dark place and it comes out very, very grainy and almost blurry looking, that's digital noise. That's noise that's on the sensor. And again, when new phones come out, that's one of the things that improve. So the newer the phone, the better quality of the phone, the less grainy digital noise you're going to get with low light pictures. So those are two big similarities between your big girl camera and your phone. Okay, so let's go back to the menu. There we go. What I want you to do is I just want you to get familiar with your camera. Know where your shutter speed is changed. Know where your aperture is changed. Know how to change your ISO. This may require opening your manual. This may require a quick Google search. But if you know how to do this, it's going to make week 2 much, much easier to understand. All right, so let me know in the comments if you have any questions. If you've got specific questions, join the Facebook Live and make sure that you reach out so that I can help you. I really, really want to help you. I can't cover everything in these videos because there's so